Hello guys, it's Noyes from Chopper Pilot 5 or Mr. Avatar 911. It depends on which source you subscribe to me from, or simply I've added you as a friend from. This video is probably going to go on both channels, so, you know, if you're listening to this on Mr. Avatar 911, sorry there wasn't a video posted last week. There probably isn't going to be one posted this week either. The weather hasn't been cooperating with me because of Hurricane Irene. I've had to deal with tons of that shit. I mean, we didn't get hammer hard here from the winds and stuff like that, but we did get hammered by rain. And, I mean, the flooding here was crazy. I got some pretty decent shots of it too. I was able to walk around for a little bit and film it. But you know, that's the main reason why I wasn't able to post a video last week, and I apologize for this. And if you're watching this on Chopper Pilot 5, then who the fuck cares? You know, I post a video whenever I want to post a video on there. Though, if you haven't checked out my channel, Mr. Avatar 911, I totally recommend that you do and subscribe to it, because I review movies there. I review them in sections. Usually they're Japanese films, but, you know, I'm going to be reviewing some other films from all around the world, good and bad. It's a pretty decent channel. I usually update it once weekly now. I highly recommend you subscribe to that, and I'm hoping I can get Your Fellow Conservative up and running pretty soon, which that's just me ranting about a bunch of political crap. Yeah. So, because of Hurricane Irene, I wasn't able to really script anything for this, so I'm just gonna say fuck it, and I'm gonna kind of do it off the top of my head, because a lot of times with my reviews and stuff like that, and usually even stuff like this, I sort of script it out, but unfortunately I wasn't able to this week. Even if you go on my page for Chopper Pilot 5, you'll see that under books, I'm writing a book, and it's a fan service book for Godzilla, because everybody knows I love friggin' Godzilla. And you know, it's funny, because whenever I'd say I love Godzilla, I'm either laughed at and I'm laughed at and called stupid for liking Godzilla. And you know, if people would just look past like the campy ones from like the late 60s into the 70s. And, you know, not that there's anything wrong with those. I love those movies too. But, you know, like, especially if they sit down and watch the first one, they'd realize that this isn't just a campy giant monster and rubber lizard suit film. I mean, the first one was sad, tragic, and it was just an all-around masterpiece. And, you know, even my relatives were like, why, Adam, you realize that your love for Godzilla is going to diminish as time goes on. And, you know, I'm very glad that it hasn't. In fact, as I get older, my love for Godzilla seems to be growing intensely. You know, not just because I love the films, but, you know, I'm definitely one of those who seeks out both the English and Japanese versions. I'm always one of those to sit down and look for those. Also, I'm like really into looking like how they made those films. I'm always into like listening to audio commentaries and whenever I can about the making of the films, or even going on like IMDb and checking out some like trivia stuff, or even finding film mistakes. You know, I just love Godzilla, and it's always drawn my attention to it. So yeah, I was writing a book. And I've actually been writing this book since 5th grade. Oh my god, it's a long time. And you know, I finished the first draft, and I was writing the second draft, and actually the second draft is kind of reinventing the first draft. But I've always had this idea for a film in my head, and it's a remake to Godzilla versus King Kong versus Godzilla. It's a remake of that, just modernized. And, you know, now that they're making now they're making a Godzilla film in 2012, even though I don't think it's going to come out in 2012, you know, it was originally going to be like a reboot to Godzilla here in the United States. But, you know, the more I'm looking at it, maybe it would be a great finale to a rebooted Godzilla series, but I just have to rewrite it quite a bit. Because the way how I'm writing it right now, it is supposed to be... It's ignoring everything that happened from between 1954 through 2004. Like, none of those sequels happened. The only one that happened was the original Godzilla. It's interesting. I will say that the first draft, what happened was it switched. I wrote it a mix between first person and third person. It was a mix because there was just one character where it was written in first person, and then the rest of it was written in third person. It's almost broken up like a Jeff Shara book or a Michael Shara book. If you read those, you'll almost read sort of the style how I'm writing this. How, like, instead of chapters saying chapter 1, the invincible blah blah blah, it goes like chapter 1, the character's name, chapter 2, the character's name, so you know which one it's going off of. And I switched it in the second book from third person dash first person to third person limited, just because, you know, I thought it would be more of a challenge to write, because I write quite a bit and I read a lot. I guess I'm going to start with basically a plot summary. It begins in the year 1969, and these two scientists are going on this island off the coast, this volcanic island that has been exposed to nuclear radiation off the coast of Australia, and what they wind up finding is like an underground lake. And they find that underground lake, and they find this huge egg that is hatched, and they find footprints leading into that underground lake. And what winds up happening is that they hear the roars, and what they think it's like another Godzilla. But we find out later that it's not a Godzilla. It's just an well, if it was mutated, then it would be a Godzilla. But it's not mutated, so it's like a Godzillasaurus from Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. But then it jumps to 2029, the 75th anniversary of Godzilla, and a meteor has crashed off the western coast of the United States, wiping out most of the west coast. And so what happens is that awakens something, and then it attacks this Japanese nuclear submarine. It attacks a Japanese nuclear submarine, and it absorbs the radiation, and the Japanese come to the Americans saying, hey, look, something happened here, and we have something on our radar. And the Americans, the Japanese, and then the Russians start getting involved, are really looking at this, saying, what the hell is it? And what winds up happening is the president winds up putting the man in charge of the rebuilding of the western coast in charge. He sends him to New York in the secret underground base that's far underneath, like, the subways of New York City. And they begin to track the creature. Meanwhile, there is these two sort of like reporters, but they're not really reporters, they're just like getting footage, homage to the original King Kong, that are going to this island somewhere in between Australia and the Philippines, and I forgot the name of it off the top of my head. And the reason why they're going there is because they had a report that a bunch of scientists went on that island and were doing experiments, but suddenly they went missing, and the ones that did survive reported of giant monsters on the island, and so they're curious, and they're going out to check it out. And so it takes them a while to get to that island. And once they get on the island, they do discover that there are giant creatures. Like, the first evidence that you get of a giant creature, it is, what is it? Those little worms, Meganurion, I think that's how you pronounce it, from Rodan, that attack the sailors' camp on the island. And then, oh yeah, there's Varan that winds up attacking them. And, well, before that there's Baragon that attacks them as a bit of a fan service. And then when they go deeper into the island, they find Kameba and Gezira fighting each other, and they fall into the ocean. And then the final monster that you get on that is Varan, that then leads to the introduction of King Kong, which King Kong comes and has a major fight with Varan, and then, you know, they wander back into, Kong wanders back off into the jungle. And therefore that leads the main characters on the island to want to capture it so they can get tons of money. Meanwhile, while this is going on, though, in the United States, they discovered that whatever this is that's moving around in the Pacific Ocean, and now it's moving its way into the Arctic Ocean above Canada, has attacked a United States nuclear submarine, and a Canadian helicopter sent to rescue the crew of that submarine because they sent out an SOS, discovers or sees these humongous spikes sticking out of the water, and steam is coming off of them. And they take photos and they send it to the Canadian Prime Minister, and the Canadian Prime Minister sends it to America, and they do. The scientists all sit down and they discover, or they all come to the same conclusion, that it is in fact Godzilla, and that Godzilla has returned after 75 years. And so they then go public with this, which starts making people worried. There's riots that start saying, why aren't you doing anything to stop this? And what winds up happening is that the United States, the Russians, and the Japanese wind up launching a naval assault against Godzilla. And, you know, they're putting everything they got into it, but they're simply not doing anything to him. And so he just annihilates the armada. And then what winds up happening is that Godzilla winds up sort of swimming down on the East Coast, and they discover that he has a possibility of landing in 3 locations in Massachusetts. One being Boston, the other one being a fictitious city called Waterville off the coast, and then a nuclear reactor, which they think that he's going after the nuclear reactor, but so they send the most forces before the nuclear reactor. But then what winds up happening is that Godzilla lands in Waterville and catches them off guard. And he blows up the city, goes back into the ocean, and then comes back the next day, wreaking havoc and destruction again. And then we go back to the island. What happens on the island is that Kong comes back, and they have what they wound up doing. They wound up digging this pit. I think they're going to wind up digging a pit, and Kong walks into a trap and falls in it, and they chloroform him, knocking him out. And they build a raft, and they start sailing him out towards the East Coast. But what winds up happening is halfway to the East Coast. No, actually, no, they're not going to do that. What winds up happening is they start sailing him to the West Coast. But what winds up happening is that they are stopped, saying that you need to return Kong at once, or else we're going to have to arrest the man in charge. And what winds up happening is that Kong wakes up in the process, and they have to shoot the dynamite rigged to Kong's raft, therefore blowing Kong up. But then Kong comes out of the water, and he disappears. And you don't really know what happens to him for a while. Then what winds up happening is that there's on the Appalachian trails, a group of hikers are just walking, and all of a sudden they hear like this heavy breathing.